All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for yet another Climate Justice Working Group meeting. I know that you're all very busy, so I'm very grateful that folks are able to jump on. And the goal is to keep this meeting to the prescribed time of an hour and a half. So apologies for any delay that might have prevented us from getting to that time, but the goal is still to keep this meeting to the time that we all agreed to. Just the typical meeting procedures. We've all seen this, mute your line if you're not speaking. You can be on camera if you want. We just had a conversation about that. But don't feel like you're obligated. But if you want to make everybody else comfortable who's already on screen, then appear on screen. There's a bit of separation between us, so we would love to see your face if you would love to show it. Raise your hand if you want to ask a question or, put stack in the chat. We will be checking the chat for questions. And for the purposes of the transcript, just say your name before you start speaking. We do sometimes go through that to find any questions or amazing insights that you guys have made. And, having you state your name beforehand helps us find those. So with that being said, we'll do a quick roll call. And before we get started, we'll start with who I can see on my screen first. So Abby.
I am here. I'm glad to see you all.
See you too. Amy.
Hello, everyone. Happy spring, ?
Jonathan.
Hi, folks. Good to see you.
And I see Rawa.
Hi, everyone.
And I'm sorry, I skipped you, Chris. Didn't mean to skip you. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Lana. Hey, everyone. Good afternoon.
Elizabeth.
Buenos días, presente, mi gente.
And Eddie.
Hey, all apologies. I just got on. I'll be joining, but without camera. COVID caught me. What can I tell y'all? But good to see everybody.
Oh, sorry to hear that, but wish you a speedy recovery.
Thank you.
And we'll acknowledge other folks as they jump on. Also pointing out Adriana Espinoza, our Deputy Commissioner for Equity and Justice, is on today, as well as Alex Dunn from Illume, Samir Ranade from NYSERDA, and we have our AIR team from DEC, our Division of AIR team, who will be giving us a presentation today. And other, of course, assorted DEC and NYSERDA employees who will be working with us and, possibly jumping in to answer questions. I'm just going to take one more look at my email before I jump on camera. And I did notice that we do have one other person who does need to be elevated. Sarin, if you can hear me, Neil Muscatelio also needs to be elevated as a panelist. And Neil, if you can hear me, you will be elevated shortly. Okay. Hopefully I didn't miss anyone who is there, and I shall push forward. So today's agenda, Today's agenda, we're going to just do a quick update on our disadvantaged communities education sessions and give you an update on the hearing schedule. Also a quick update on the Climate Action Council, the public hearings on the draft scoping plan that have taken place, and we'll have a presentation on the disadvantaged communities for air monitoring screening from our Division of Air Resources. Does anybody have any questions before we move forward? Okay. So The public education sessions, we held two this week and last week. So the first of which was held on the 13th from noon to 2 p.m. And we held a second one just yesterday from 6 to 8. The session that we held yesterday was actually translated into Spanish. Both sessions were recorded, so we're going to make them available on our climate.ny.gov website. Overall, I think we were very pleased with how they went. It went very smoothly. Both took about an hour, including questions. And I think that we got through the presentation pretty much unscathed. I think everybody seemed to be happy with it, and hopefully we will be able to generate some good comments. And definitely encourage people to sort of reach out if they have additional questions and give us any comments. So if any of your constituents who didn't get to see the videos, or if anybody is attending who didn't get to see that, we do hope to share those very shortly. And moving on to the public hearings, Adriana.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you. Those of you who I can see, just want to reiterate that I do what Alana said. I do think the education sessions that we had went well. I think inherently what we're trying to communicate with the public about is inherently a little wonky. Breaking down criteria and indicators, methodology, data. And so we tried our best to speak in plain language and to make this content as understandable as possible. But just wanted to add that if you were able to attend any of the education sessions or are able to look at them after the fact when they're online, we'd welcome any feedback that you have on improving or being concise in communicating this to the public. Okay, so moving on, wanted to give you a quick update on public hearings on the draft disadvantaged communities criteria. So the staff is working to plan and schedule hearings as required under the CLCPA. We are currently planning to hold 10 hearings statewide in May and June. Just for your awareness, our strategy for disadvantaged communities, sort of the DAC engagement generally, is to focus heavily on outreach and education so that as many New Yorkers in disadvantaged communities as possible are empowered to provide comments. And that means regardless of whether they do so via our hearings, but that we're putting as much information out there into the public ether so they could send it via mail, email, or in their own time, if that's easier for them. This includes the development of a short fact sheet, which is being translated into the top 10 languages spoken in the state. We'll plan on using those and having them available during the hearings. And we're proposing that hearings be a mix between virtual and in-person. With the virtual hearings taking place via WebEx, I do want to acknowledge there was a request for us to look into Zoom, and unfortunately do not have access to be able to provide that. So the virtual ones will take place on WebEx. The hearings will be a legislative hearings format with a brief targeted statement on the Climate Justice Working Group process and the DAC criteria. We also want to be able to sort of regionalize that presentation so folks understand what disadvantaged communities criteria, the draft criteria looks like in their own communities. We are recommending but not requiring registration so that we're able to prioritize local residents. For the virtual hearings, they'll technically be open to anyone, right? Anyone can register and use the link. Knowing how many folks from the targeted area are in attendance will help us with logistics on the back end to be able to prioritize hearing from community members first. Similarly with the CAC, there will be a 2-minute time limit for comments, but additional comments may be submitted for the record in writing or on the internet or via email. All comments that we receive, regardless of whether they're in a hearing or email or another form, will have the same weight as live comments in the hearing. and would respectfully request your support in spreading the word, particularly in your region. Once we have this hearing schedule live. So with that, I'll go to the next slide, please. Okay, so here is a proposed, an overview of our proposed schedule here. This is all tentative at this point, but we are planning to announce the full details as soon as possible. As you can see here, we're covering statewide. The considerations, we did do a mix between virtual and in-person, 3 in-person in particular. For your awareness, considerations on the virtual and versus in-person and the locations were based on where do we have a concentration of disadvantaged communities, also considering the geography of the region and whether the region is sort of wide and then spread out and dispersed, or more densely populated, and accessibility via public transit, and also, as always, staff capacity as well. And so this is where we ended up with. We will plan to do, similar as with the education sessions, a mix between weekday evening and lunch hour hearings. Okay, with that, I will turn it over to Samir. Next slide.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to give a quick update on the public hearings and related engagement process. We have had 4 well-attended public hearings thus far in the Bronx, Brookhaven, Binghamton, and Albany. We continue to receive a solid stream of written public comments. The last approximate tally is 8,000. And as you can see on this slide, we have 4 remaining in-person hearings and 2 more virtual. By the way, if any of you will be at the Brooklyn or Tupper Lake hearings, I look forward to seeing you there. And we are really grateful for your work in turning out members of your community to submit written comments or attend the hearings to deliver them verbally. On April 1st, you should have received a toolkit from the Climate Act email address to help you promote the scoping plan public comment opportunities among the members of your communities and organization. So please let me know if you need me to resend that, or if you'd like other forms of assistance to encourage public participation. We'll also be providing similar materials for the DAC criteria soon too. Comments, as I think you know, comments from members of the public are accepted until June 10. And as members of the Climate Justice Working Group, your direct engagement with the Climate Action Council can continue as you all see fit as the scoping plan is finalized by the end of this year. Earlier this week, I sent you all the materials regarding your previous input to the Climate Action Council, and we look forward to hearing from you once you have had the chance to review them. And feel free to reach out to me anytime with questions, concerns, or ideas. And Eddie, I saw you put something in the chat, and I'll make sure that you get that scoping plan toolkit sent out again. Thank you. And that's all I had.
I had a quick question.
Go ahead.
Hey, Samir, thanks for the updates. I did see the email. I think what it was, and apologies, I've been fuzzy all week and it's not getting any better. But when I saw the email about the Climate Action Council, what appeared to me was a compilation of places where the Climate Action Council responded to Climate Justice Working Group recommendations last year. But what I just want to make sure and again, I wanted to thank you for doing, the due diligence of kind of tracking it down and putting it all in one place for us, which is really helpful. I just want to be clear though, that what you pulled together was you being helpful to us, right, Samir? But this is not to be considered a formal response from the Climate Action Council to the Climate Justice Working Group recommendations, right? Because my sense is that the Climate Action Council, at least one of them, said that they, as far as they're concerned, they've not responded officially slash formally as quote unquote the council to our recommendations. I'm going to make sure that that's an accurate sense, and that what you shared with us isn't like the formal Climate Action Council response. It's you being helpful to us and compiling everything, but like the formal response from the Climate Action Council to our recommendations hasn't happened, and it's unclear whether it actually will ever formally happen. But I'm just looking for some clarity. So let me stop there.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. And first, I'm sorry to hear that you have COVID, and I hope you feel better. You're right. So the intent of that was to show you how the input provided by the entire working group was characterized in the scoping plan. So that was just kind of an objective effort to assemble all of that information, taking exact instances of input you provided, and then seeing how that was characterized in the draft. So that was that was not like a new or a formal response from the Climate Action Council itself, but as I kind of indicated in the email, that is something that's like an opportunity that is happening now, and these and ongoing discussions on all of these items are live, and so over the next coming months we can figure that out so that you can get we can have the back and forth dialogue. But that was certainly not the intent of the documents provided. That was just more to show you the characterization of your input in every instance of your input in the draft.
Can I ask a follow-up, Samir?
Yep.
Do you have a sense of when they will be responding to the Climate Justice Working Group? The reason that I'm asking is that as we have already started the public process, and it's kind of hard to have any faith in whether or not the public will really have any input in the sense that it's going to be taken into account when the Climate Justice Working Group is struggling to be taken seriously and has not yet heard. So it kind of diminishes this public process if those of us who come from the climate justice movement, who are in community and work with our communities, aren't being responded to.
Well, the first thing I'll say, and sorry, I forgot to mention this, was you got the formal response that was sent a month or so ago from President Harris and Commissioner Sagos, kind of just laying out the intent and the importance of getting your input into the plan going forward. So I would say that is something that we still have, that opportunity is open. So we basically need to, and I think we can do this in another meeting, so we won't have time to go into it now, but let's figure out the process for engagement, because we want that to happen. And I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything from.
Sure, I'll just chime in to respond, Elizabeth, to your comments there. So yes, there was, before Samir put together the email that was sent to you, that you and Eddie both referenced, there was a letter from the CAC in the form of a letter from Commissioner Sagos and President Harris, as mentioned. I think that was intended to communicate that there is desire to further engage as the CAC is finalizing the scoping plan. And I think the one thing that we want to talk about with the Climate Justice Working Group is, what form does that take? What does that look like? Are they co-convened meetings? Are they written comments? I think that sort of what I see as next steps here to continue this engagement. Hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions about the hearings, the disadvantaged communities criteria hearings I put up, or anything before we move on to the next portion of the meeting?
I would just say quickly that if the public has to use a WebEx, that there, I don't know if you've done this, you may have already done this, but that there is information about how to make sure this is working way in advance, so that they don't have to deal with the frustration that we often have to deal with when we're trying to get on. The fact that they have to use Google Chrome, all of the things that they need to do in advance, and to just let them know that this is something that they should not wait till the last minute to do if they want to testify on that day, because I can see tremendous frustration in being able to use this this platform.
Yep, that's something that we definitely do when we send around WebExes for events like that. Our Office of Communication Services sends around instructions to help folks ahead of time. So we'll definitely make sure that that gets around.
Thank you.
Right. If there are no other questions, we can move on to the presentation from our Division of Air Resources. So I will turn things over to our Deputy Commissioner for Energy, Jared Snyder.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Hope everybody's doing well. And Eddie, I hope you recover quickly. So we have a fairly extensive presentation today about the air monitoring program that we have in mind. Let's go to the next slide. This is really the most ambitious air monitoring program, most ambitious and extensive that we have done in New York, and this, one of the most extensive that I'm aware of taking place anywhere in the country. It is intended to implement and in fact go beyond what's required by the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which requires us to undertake a program in 4 communities. As you'll see, we're going well beyond that. The purpose of this program is to give us a great deal of information to enable us to identify and address disproportionate air pollution impacts in disadvantaged communities across New York State. And so this program consists really of 2 different pieces that we'll be talking about. First is a statewide screening effort in 10 communities burdened by air pollution. This was initially announced by Governor Hochul back in Climate Week in September of 2021. It's going to target 10 communities with a population of around 5 million people all across New York State, both upstate and downstate. And that's what most of our presentation is going to be about today. But that effort's also going to be complemented by community-driven initiatives. First is going to be capacity building for environmental justice community groups in the 10 communities where we will be undertaking this monitoring. And then a second piece is going to be community-driven monitoring in 4 communities that will actually be led by grassroots environmental justice organizations. And we'll touch on that piece at the end of today's, or towards the end of today's meeting. So that's really just a quick opening. We have a number of people from the Division of Air Resources that are going to be going into some aspects of this program in some detail. And I'd like to start by turning it over to Margaret Lafar, who is the Assistant Director of our Division of Air Resources, to take the next few slides. So Margaret.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to talk about this project. So next slide. The community air monitoring statewide screen that we have proposed or are planning for New York will include mobile air quality screening using high-resolution sensors to provide a comparison and evaluation across neighborhoods and drive solutions to reduce pollution. Next. The purpose of this screening, aside from being required by the CLCPA, is really to identify air quality issues in those disadvantaged communities so that we can plan for some future emissions reductions. Long term, we see diesel emissions reductions, regulations addressing stationary sources. In the short term, we will look at local facility inspections and do some permit enforcement. One of the other important parts of this is really to empower the communities with easy to understand information on air pollution. Another item, we could locate leaks in natural gas infrastructure and get those repaired, and identify sources of greenhouse gases and other pollutants. As Jared mentioned, this will take place in 10 communities across the state, home to about 5 million people. The air quality screening will be conducted using a mobile screening approach to obtain estimated annual averages for each pollutant in each of those communities. Information is collected block by block over a 100-meter road segment. And this consistent methodology will allow the results to be comparable within the project. So of those 10 communities, 4 will begin the monitoring in June of 2022, and we are phasing this in to ease some of the workload burden and to help us be able to respond to the communities as we're going through this process. The other 6 communities will begin in September, and the survey data collection will continue through September 2023, with final reporting in early 2024. The pollutants measured include several of the criteria pollutants that we include in our regulatory monitoring network, so carbon monoxide, nitrous oxides, ozone, particulate matter, as well as some of the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, ethane, and some targeted toxics monitoring and black carbon. So we wanted to make sure that we're not forgetting about the state regulatory monitoring network, and that network is very important to this project as well. DEC currently operates a robust network of 54 sites that generate 1.4 million data points annually. 25 of those sites are in potential environmental justice areas, and Aclima's survey measurements will be adjusted to match the network data, removing the impact of the varying background concentrations. So the contractor that we have contracted with is Aclima. They will be collecting the air monitoring data with their sensor node platform. They are a San Francisco-based public benefit corporation. They use internet connected air quality sensors and operate a software platform to help analyze the data and visualize the results. The analysis is block by looks at block by block data and produces gradient maps showing, indicating areas where values are higher and lower. The results will be available on the cloud-based software Aclima Pro. So this Aclima platform, Aclima Pro, provides access to high-resolution data within selected communities to DEC, the Community Justice Working Group, and participating CBOs with Aclima Pro. This will incorporate other data, including the locations of sensitive receptors such as hospitals, nursing homes, schools, and community-led complementary monitoring efforts. The data that will be included in the package is all publicly available data. It'll just be included in a package so that we can visualize the monitored results with some of this data that would help to provide some context. So the mobile sensors are mounted on Aclima's fleet of vehicles. They will collect the data by driving at least 20 times on each road segment at different times of the day, days of the week, and seasons of the year to measure air pollution in these 10 communities. We want to make sure that they're getting good coverage to be representative of all times of day and of the year. So with this mobile air quality screening, we do want to make a few distinctions between this data and what we would collect for our regulatory monitors. This data are hyperlocal. So this platform allows us to see some differences on a scale that we can't normally do with regulatory monitoring. It will cover 100-meter roadway segments. It's a wide spatial coverage, and it's helpful for identifying potential local sources of air pollution. What this data are not, they are not the regulatory monitors, and the data cannot be compared to the National Ambient Air Quality Standards or used alone for enforcement purposes. They're also not designed to characterize an individual's exposure or risk, but give us more of a comparison between areas. So the one other thing about Aclima, they have formed a partnership with Block Power and providing expanded jobs program in New York City. And they are a tech startup who will work with Aclima and its community and government partners to train staff and workforce trainees to operate Aclima's mobile environmental sensor network. Through this partnership, Block Power will provide recruitment and workforce development support to Aclima, sourcing talent from impacted communities. And now Marilyn Worth, who spoke to you last month, will talk about the air burden communities and go through her analysis.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. Next slide, please. Last meeting, we proposed an initial screening approach to select disadvantaged communities, or DACs, for air monitoring according to the requirements in the Climate Act and the work completed with the Climate Justice Work Group to define disadvantaged communities. During this presentation, I will describe our process for identifying disadvantaged communities identified as having high air burdens based on the DAC criteria, and show the communities selected for air quality monitoring. The final boundaries for monitoring are not being defined now. DEC will meet with the communities to collect input to define the boundaries. The draft DAC criteria is also still undergoing public review. Next slide, please. Here are the 12 environmental indicators most associated with air pollution burden that were used to calculate the air pollution burden score. These indicators came from the 44 indicators used to identify disadvantaged communities, or DACs. They represent possible air pollution burdens from traffic, specific pollutants like particulate matter or PM 2.5, and sources such as major oil storage facilities, power plants, and scrap metal processors. It's important to remember there are limitations associated with these indicators that may result indicators do not include pollution toxicity and dispersion of the emissions. These limitations are discussed in the technical support documents available on the New York State Climate Act website. Next slide, please. The air pollution burden score was calculated by averaging the sum of the percentile ranks for each of the indicators and then generating statewide and rest of state, or outside of New York City, percentile ranks for the census tracts. The air pollution burden scores were incorporated into the table with the DAC designations, retaining the DAC identification that was based upon both the environmental and vulnerability components. All the census tracts were ranked from high to low based upon the percentiles and then divided into 3 groups: the top, middle, and bottom 33%, because our goal is to identify locations with high air pollution burden. In accordance with the scoring methodology to identify DACs, we separated New York City from the rest of the state census tracts and grouped DAC census tracts with top air pollution burden for community districts in New York City and by community names. The census tract groupings were also sorted by population. Next slide, please. To identify areas with higher air pollution burden, we filtered the data by air burden scores greater than or equal to the 90th percentile and those having 4 or more indicators with values greater than the 67th percentile rank. This initial pinpointing process helps us identify the communities with higher air burden areas. During the selection of community areas, other nearby DAC census tracts were included. These census tracts may be less than the 90th percentile and have less than 4 indicators. This process will undergo further refinement after we meet with the communities and consider additional pertinent information. Next slide. This map shows the communities outside of New York City. That's Buffalo, Niagara Falls, Rochester, Syracuse, Capital Region, Mount Vernon and Yonkers, and Hempstead on Long Island, and the 4 boroughs, Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, and Manhattan, with higher air burden selected for the air monitoring screening assessment. The full outline of the community monitored will be worked out with each community. These maps illustrate the relative boundaries. Next slide. This table shows selected DAC communities identified as having higher air pollution burden outside of New York City with this initial screening approach. The first column shows the average air pollution burden score for the selected community. The second column is the number of census tracts, and the third column shows the total population. The average air pollution burden score was calculated for these areas relative to each other without New York City. In the Mid-Hudson region, Mount Vernon, Yonkers has the highest aggregated average burden score. Some communities have more census tracts and lower air burden scores that may be decreasing the overall average score. At the census tract level, there may be a range of values across a community. Next slide. This table shows the selected DAC boroughs identified as having higher air pollution burden in New York City with this initial screening approach. The data reflect aggregated census tracts with the highest air burden scores greater than the 90th percentile rank and 4 or more indicators. The first column shows the average air pollution burden score. The second column is the number of census tracts, and the third column shows the total population. There are more DAC census tracts in each borough not shown in this table. The higher burden areas were mapped and then expanded to surrounding DAC census tract areas. These community boundaries will be refined with community input. Thank you.
All right, so with this collection of data, of course, we want to be able to communicate the results. So the next few slides are just on the reporting and response actions. DEC will coordinate with the local CBOs and will provide periodic updates to the community. We're really going to be looking to get feedback from the local CBOs and trying to tailor some of the communications pieces to meet those needs. In addition, the participating CBOs and the Community Justice Working Group will have access to preliminary and first available data through Aclima Pro. DEC will work with the participating CBOs and community stakeholders and provide interim progress updates and data summaries. And then the final report will be available after a year of data has been collected and be shared with the communities themselves. As the project progresses, DEC will be monitoring the data as it comes in and will take appropriate action in consultation with community stakeholders. Following the conclusion of this year-long community screening, we will identify elevated areas and potential source contributions. An assessment will be used to develop short-term actions and long-term strategies to address air quality issues identified by the screening, along with the community stakeholders. And actions could include additional monitoring to isolate issues, excuse me, enforcement, and possibly some regulatory or permitting actions. All right, and I believe Adriana is going to take over the next few slides on next steps.
Sure. Okay. So next steps, will be April and May doing outreach to local community-based organizations in the 4 communities that are selected for the first phase. We are proposing those communities to be Western New York, so Buffalo, Niagara, Capital Region, Bronx, Manhattan, and Queens. And that should include relevant climate justice working group members, but also local stakeholders that aren't represented on the climate justice working group. And so it would be helpful to work with you all to, particularly if your organization is in one of these regions, to help identify who needs to be in the room and who needs to be part of the discussion as we start to build this out more. And the outreach will be to help define the boundaries of the areas that are going to be monitored and the structure of our stakeholder engagement to make sure that we're setting up a just and equitable engagement process, and to consider the indicators and sort of ground truth in local areas of concern or different types of activities that they should be aware of heading into this effort. Next slide.
Hey, Adriana, it's Jared. I just wanted to jump in on that. I think we're still deciding between Manhattan and Queens for that 4th area to be in the initial phase, and we'll be following up with that information.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying that, Jared. Okay, and so we can talk a little bit about the community-led effort here. Next slide, please. So we don't have detailed information at this time, but we can tell you that funding will be available to support projects in disadvantaged communities, either the same 10 communities we just went through, or different from the screening effort. As this is a community-driven effort, it may include additional pollutants and possibly provide additional data points. And the complementary monitoring will be led by community-based organizations via a competitive grant process, and so to be designed by the groups themselves. Next slide. Oh, I think I already covered that. Design, yep. All right. And this is just a thank you slide from the AIR team to make sure that you have their information there.
Okay, thanks, Adriana, and thank you to Division of Air for your presentation. Did anybody have any questions for our AIR team, or before we just talk about next steps?
Hey, it's Eddie. Can someone, could you just pull up the slide that had the list of co-pollutants that I just didn't get a chance to see that.
Gonna have to jump back. Apologies.
Oh, and while she's going to the slide, I just want to add that the only data that is related to air quality measurements is included in this process.
Thank you, Adriana.
Is this a slide you wanted to see, Eddie?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Okay, thank you so much. And I just want to make sure that I read it correctly. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Not a question per se, but just a comment, and this may or may not be applicable for others, but so my group, my organization, New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, I guess most know that it's a citywide coalition of community-based groups from the city's most environmentally overburdened neighborhoods. And part of the work that we've done for years is we have our own hyperlocal air monitoring program that we call Camp EJ. I think it stands for Community Air Monitoring Project, I guess, in environmental justice communities, or Camp EJ. And we're gearing up to do our usual air monitoring. And I just want to again express thanks to Jared, Adriana, and others at DEC, because we've had some offline conversations, and I just want to make sure that we are aligning and complementing, hopefully the air monitor. How can I put this? I want to make sure that we're aligning what should be complementary, and in fact, even in the aggregate, just a good number of different air monitoring projects that could maybe, either share data or have access to. I mean, I think it's a really good moment for us to be talking about this. But I was just wondering if DEC could speak a little bit to how the state will or thinks how it might integrate or look to other air monitoring projects that may or may not be going on, so that we're all aggregating data and getting the best kind of picture of our communities as possible. I mean, I could tell you guys that of the four communities, and I totally get that that's the term of art. Communities in New York City's case being boroughs, right? But of the four boroughs, we are going to be doing air testing in neighborhoods in 3 of those. So we're mindful also, and want to be clear about how we can complement each other's air monitoring as we get closer to those dates. And I had another question, but I'll just pause for a second.
Yeah, Eddie, thanks for raising that. And I think it's great that these other efforts are going on, and as Adriana mentioned, we'll be funding even more additional complementary efforts. And all of this information helps give us a robust picture of air quality in the disadvantaged communities across New York State. The screen enables us to do sort of one broad look across the state that uses a common technology, but then it is complemented by efforts like what you're doing, like New York City's effort, like the other efforts we'll be funding. And I think every bit of information helps, because this all goes to, not knowledge for knowledge's sake, but knowledge to drive response actions and help achieve the goals of the Climate Act, including addressing air pollution impacts in disadvantaged communities. So, to the extent that your monitoring shows us something that our work isn't showing, that's great, and that's information we want to see. And maybe the technical teams can work together to look for how we can actually integrate the data, into a common system, so that it's all, readily accessible.
If I can add to that, Jared, thank you. Yes, we share that desire, Eddie, to make these efforts complementary to each other and to try to create, not knowledge for knowledge's sake, knowledge for action's sake, right? And so to the extent that there are efforts like Camp EJ and others where there is data that could be additive to the sort of solutions generation and that we get to at the end, I do know that we'd like to include that should should the organizations want to sort of include that in the platform. I also wanted to mention just back on the sort of community-based efforts that we're thinking of. We are currently working on grant opportunities to support community-based organizations in looking to build capacity for air monitoring and build capacity to sort of monitor and track and follow along this process that we presented today in the 10 identified communities. And so specifically by building capacity, we're thinking, projects, grants for grants that could include activities that are pretty broad to support frontline organizations as they see fit, and I think we can keep it broad to items like meeting facilitation for awareness and outreach on this effort, travel and other associated meeting costs that organizations may have related to this effort, hiring technical experts, consultants, trainers to help with as it relates to air monitoring. Educational sessions on data reporting and communications, community technical trainings, community-led air protection efforts and solutions generation, and technical implementation, or like things like deploying sensors. And so keeping it pretty broad so that community-based organizations in these 10 areas are able to define for themselves the support that they would like to be involved in this effort. And then in addition to that sort of broad capacity building, we're looking to do additional air monitoring grants to actually supplement and do air monitoring on the ground, or have community-based organizations do that, being developed are also being developed as well. These grants will be funded and administered by the Office of Environmental Justice via our competitive grants process. And want to underscore that we want to ensure that these grants support frontline-led community-based efforts. And so that's sort of what we're thinking. We're planning on the community-driven part. Sorry for the long-winded response to your question.
Thanks. I just had one or two other quick points, but I'll let me be quiet and hear from my fellow working group members.
This is Abby. I have a question. So you mentioned that round 2 of the communities that you'd be doing this work in, you're aiming for September start. And I'm wondering, with the capacity building funding, will that be in place in time for communities to be ready for September?
Sure, great question. So we are working on that process now and trying to roll it out as quickly as possible. You know, we do think that these efforts will line up together to be able to support community-based organizations, but still working out all of the details of that process.
Okay, thanks.
If I guess while we're waiting for possible other comments, I we have you know, just in the interest of transparency, we've had you know, obviously some, you know, a couple of conversations with DEC leading up to this launch, and again want to appreciate the candor and the back and forth. You know, the issues that we flagged, you know, a variety, everything from, you know, data transparency and access and accountability for how the testing happens. That coupled with, you know, ensuring that the integrity of independent air monitoring programs are you know, supported through this effort. You know, we have heard of a number of instances, both on the West Coast and lately in New York, that have shown not great experiences that some EJ groups have had with Aclima. In fact, a couple that have been you know, there have been direct complaints that have been raised with a couple of groups over time. I'm not going to speak to them because, you know, these groups have spoken directly to agency reps either on the West Coast or here in New York. I do want to just you know, just for the record, note that that's, you know, there have been, you know, some concerns, and that we are hoping that DEC, you know, in hearing these, you know, will continue to communicate some of these concerns to the vendor, and ensure that we, you know, as we move forward, that we are adjusting for problems that we've heard in prior modeling or monitoring initiatives. And to that end, you know, I think that a key component of that, you know, accountability, making sure that the air monitoring happens, you know, following community direction and respecting community experience and knowledge. The establishment of these advisory groups are going to be key. But it's a little chicken or egg at this moment we find ourselves in, right? Because the advisory groups have not been set up yet. And DEC, you know, needs, I'm assuming, will be looking for recommendations on how to do outreach and who they may or may not know that they might want to kind of connect to as you're looking to get deeper into the community oversight of the monitoring in the 10 communities. To that end, I would just urge, and it's probably it's probably in the law. It's been a long time since I've looked at the section of it, so I don't remember precisely what it says. But I would urge DEC, and I don't know if NYSERDA has any role in this. It sounds like it's mostly DEC, and to that end, I would just urge DEC to, you know, find ways of working with this climate justice working group, find ways of tapping into our relative geographic areas of expertise across the state, as you're building out the advisory boards, to avoid this being a top-down, you know, I know that's not the intent, but it could become that if DEC is solely doing the outreach and only the only entity figuring out, you know, which community stakeholders they should reach out to and who not to. I think to avoid some of that top-down potential outcomes. I would just urge you all to work closely with the Climate Justice Working Group in helping identify folks that may or may not be on the agency's radar. And last but not least, there were comments that we shared also, not just in terms of data accessibility, but also just to avoid any potential conflicts of interest. It would be really helpful on the contracting side, especially as you start looking at community organizations and community partners to fund as part of the overall air monitoring effort. I think it's just to make sure that there is complete public trust in the outcome of this. We have to make sure that there are conflict of interest triggers, or at least conflict of interest lenses through which DEC will look at responses to the RFP to make sure that, for example, there may not be corporate overlaps between leadership in some community-based organizations and people who may actually have a business interest with the company directly. So nothing would undermine this process more if down the road it turns out that these kind of conflicts of interest that could have been avoided were not somehow just overseen. I think part of the main problem is these are the kinds of things that happens when government does a sole source contract as opposed to a competitive bid contract for this air monitoring initiative. But that being said, we're now on the verge of doing this. I just wanted to make sure that the issues and concerns that we've been flagging continue to be part of the calculus that DEC uses as it goes to really kind of roll out the program, and that it continue to use the Climate Justice Working Group as an asset and partner in helping to come up with the best air monitoring program that we can. As Jared said, this is the biggest we've done in New York State, and maybe the biggest anywhere. And I mean, so among the states, all eyes are going to be on us to get it done right here in New York, and it says a lot for our collective work together. We can make sure we get it done right. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox, but thanks for all that.
Thanks, Eddie. So I will start, by responding, and I think maybe others will want to chime in, but I wanted to first, acknowledge and hear those concerns that you've raised, and express that I share the commitment on making this an equitable process, and one, I think, speaking of, how do we prevent it from being top down? I think we prevent it from being top down by being serious about centering the community-driven efforts and the community input into this process. And so that's why what we presented on here today is openly is the methodology and the communities that highlighted. And then that's why our immediate next step is to meet with stakeholders in each of these communities to firm up the details of what does a just partnership look like in these communities. How are we going to work together in this effort? Ground truthing all of the different land uses in the communities, and where should we firming up the edges, so to speak, which I'm sure Jerry can talk to a little bit more. And so just wanted to express that I hear that, and that is fully our intent in building out this process. And our immediate next step is going to be identifying those stakeholders with you all. So we're going to keep you in partnership here.
Yeah, and Adriana, that's great. I'd just like to add that we really see this as a partnership between DEC and the communities that are familiar with all the issues they face, that are familiar with the sources, that are familiar with the land use in their community, as Adriana said. So that's a partnership between DEC and the communities. Aclima is our contractor. They're going to be operating in our direction. They're going to be gathering the data, but we're going to be working with you to to basically target the program, design the program in each of these communities. That's DEC and the impacted communities that will be doing that.
There is a question in the chat from Peter King that I think it would be great for someone to answer.
Answering that right now. Thanks. Okay. Are there any additional questions or comments before we move forward?
Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to say that I got kicked off right after I stopped speaking. I don't know if anyone responded to me or addressed me, but I'm really sorry, and I'm back.
Okay. Before I go into our next steps, I wanted to quickly throw this over to Amanda from Illume, who has a little bit of an announcement. Amanda?
Hi everyone, can you see my video? Well, I haven't been on these calls lately because you've been doing so much other work, but we spent a lot of time together getting deeply into the disadvantaged communities definition, the data and approaches. And I think, our first meeting tracks back to October 2020, which might be hard to believe. I am leaving Illume today, actually. It's my last day to take some time off and focus on a house building project that's been languishing. So I've kind of poured myself into this work, but I just wanted to say thank you for all of the work you've done on this, and I just have so much appreciation and respect for all of the work and time you've put into this amidst everything else you're holding up. It was an incredible amount of work, and I really appreciate so many meetings and really diving into the data, and so much appreciation. After we finished everything up in December, you didn't stop. You went right back into it. You went right back into legislative work and more work to hold the state accountable to the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And I know that, this 18 months is just a blip of all the dedicated work you're doing elsewhere. So I just have learned so much about New York, and about, what it means to be dedicated to serving your communities. And just wanted to recognize all of that work, and also recognize how much work the agencies have done. The DEC staff have done so much and paid so much attention to detail in this work, and also Neil and his team at the DOH, and Chris and Tyler and Samir at NYSERDA. It has been just a really incredible experience working and learning from all of you, and seeing the passion and time you've put into this. So thank you.
Amanda, can I respond to what you just said, please?
Sure.
I just want to say that, those of us who do this work, who are environmental justice, climate justice activists, literally feel like we're fighting for our lives and the lives of our community. And we move at the speed of trust. And we have been disappointed over and over again. And we find that in our lifetimes, when people negotiate and they compromise, what they're literally compromising is the lives of our people. And so I wanted to thank you because, you came into this without knowing us. And at every step, you were really open, you recalibrated. It felt the level of emotional intelligence and empathy coming from you was pretty significant. And there's certainly a group of people here that you've named that are the same. And so I just wanted to say that I am deeply grateful for you not just focusing on data and outcomes and research, but understanding process and understanding struggle, because that really certainly came through in the way that you communicated with us, and how I would see from one meeting to the other how things were changing. Anyway, I wanted to express deep gratitude for that. I'm always going to be difficult. I fight for my people to be able to breathe. That's what I do. And that's not an easy job. And it's not one that I ever wanted. But you certainly have exhibited the kind of alignment and allyship that we so much need in order to move the dial. So, gracias. I just wanted to say thank you. Back to you.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm getting off camera again.
Okay. Thank you, Alana.
Oh, no, absolutely. You have been an amazing partner. I've enjoyed all of our interactions, all of our email exchanges, and your work and your diligence and your passion is absolutely going to be missed. And so just thank you so much for everything that you've done. All the dedication, it really is overwhelming, and I will definitely miss you.
Yeah. Thank you. Elizabeth, thank you so much for your words. And I think, so much of what you brought and were able to express really put us in a position to be able to find that truth in the data, to be able to take what you're fighting and standing for and trying to find a way to find, a way to support and represent that. So it's just our whole team had to come together for this. Thank you.
Amanda, not sure you see, but you're getting a lot of working group love in the chat. Just make sure you're capturing it.
Sappy moment. Thank you. Well, back to next ups.
Yes. See, I don't want to interrupt the sappy moments. So next steps, we are basically going to be emailing you. We have heard that you guys would like to visit perhaps a different way of scheduling meetings in the future. So we'll be reaching out to see if there's a better way to do that. I know that this is not always the way that we schedule them. It's not always the most convenient way for folks. And so I'm always open to finding a way to move forward and do it so it works for everybody. And so we'll definitely be reaching out with regards to that. I wanted to put up and just remind, of course, you guys know, but to remind other folks and have you remind your constituents and, friends and everyone that, we are still in the middle of the public comment period. It ends on July 7th. For anybody who is attending, here are the ways that you can provide us public comments on the disadvantaged communities criteria. We absolutely want to hear from you. We want to make sure that, if there's anything that we forgot, or if there's anything else that, needs to be added, or if you just have comments on it, that we get those. We want to make sure that we're putting out the best product possible. It's very, very important. So I really hope that everybody who has an opportunity to provide comments to us does that. And again, just to remind folks, in April and May, we are going to be doing outreach to community-based organizations in the communities selected for the first phase. And it disappeared. So we're looking at Western New York, Capital Region, Bronx, and Manhattan and Queens. We're going to use that outreach to define the boundaries of the areas that are going to be monitored and to structure the stakeholder engagement. And we're also going to be considering, the air pollution indicators and local sources of concern. And we will definitely want to share the hearing schedule as soon as possible. So help spread the word to let people know that that will be coming down the pipeline very, very soon. And we definitely want to talk about continuing the conversation on engagement with the Climate Action Council on the scoping plan. So we'll be looking to reach out to you guys on that. Sorry, the public comment, the slide disappeared. I wanted folks to make sure folks saw it. And I will be making sure that this presentation is available to you all. We'll try to get it posted on the climate.ny.gov website as soon as possible. And if anybody has any questions or concerns, as always, to reach out to me. For folks who are on the attendees, if you have any questions, there is an email address on the climate.ny.gov specifically for the Climate Justice Working Group. So if you have Climate Justice Working Group related questions, please feel free to send them through the email. And that's all I have. So does anybody have anything else that they would like to say or add before we close things out today?
Feel better, Eddie?
Yes, absolutely.
Folks, I'm waiting for the COVID test results. Like, all I can tell you is the irony of having a lung complicated illness on 420 is not lost on me. But have a great afternoon, folks.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Yeah. Thanks, everyone, for taking time to meet with us, and we will be in touch soon. Bye.
Happy Earth Week.